Hey folks, this is Jason with the Primal Outdoors channel, and today we're going to talk about the 5 things that you should consider before you decide to not only live in your van, but to try to make a living working out of your van. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail because everybody's situations are going to be slightly different. I just want to make sure that everybody is considering everything you're going to need to know before you start trying to work out of your van. And I'll show you how I'm accomplishing these items, knowing that, again, everybody's situations are going to be a little bit different, and the way I'm handling things isn't always going to work for everybody. Make sure you stick around to the end of the video because I'll get into the most important consideration last. All right, so let's jump right in and talk about the first thing that you're going to want to think about when it comes to van life, and that is going to be your workspace. I think a lot of people think about the living part of the van, and so they think about building their bed, they think about building their kitchen, their water supply, storage space, all those things. But the workspace where they're going to be working and making a living every day, that kind of goes as a bit of an afterthought. And trust me, you're not going to want to just lay on your bed with your laptop on your legs, because that's going to get uncomfortable very quickly. So in my particular case, I have taken some time, and I've gone through many iterations in my van trying to figure out the best way of doing it. And right now I've got a way that's working out really well for me. I basically have a piece of plywood that I use as a desk that is removable. So it lays across from my kitchen table over to my bed, and that gives me a nice level surface to work with, also giving me some space on my kitchen table to set things, and also giving me lots of space on my bed to set things, because again, I'm editing videos. A lot of times I might have all my cameras laid out so that I can dump memory cards, that kind of stuff, or I might be using other devices like my pen tablet if I'm doing photo editing, or I might also use my Loupedeck if I'm editing in Lightroom. So having some space to actually work with and plenty of space to work with is really nice. And the other nice thing is this is storable. So all I have to do is, when I put my laptop and everything away, it stores off to the side and it's not in my way when I'm not working. So that's also a consideration, is making sure that, you're not eating up all your space with your workstation when you're not working. But it does give me a good workspace. I also have, consideration is, what you're going to use for a computer. Are you going to use a laptop? Most likely in a van, that's what you're going to be using. But depending on your job, you might be able to use a tablet and a keyboard. If most of what you're doing is maybe email support or something like that, you might be able to get away with that. In my case, again, because I'm using, doing a lot of video editing and photo editing, I use a laptop, but then I also use my tablet as a second monitor, because it's really nice to be able to spread my programs out across 2 monitors. And with the Mac operating system or the Mac system, you can use your tablet inherently as basically a second monitor. If you have a Windows system, I believe you can still do the same thing, but it requires a third-party app. But this gives me a really nice setup for me to be able to work from. And it's at a good height. So, my keyboard's a little bit high, but not too bad. And my monitors are pretty eye level. They're a little bit low, but again, not too bad. So this is a pretty comfortable setup for me to work at. For my chair, all I'm using is a little cooler. This is an Arctic cooler that I got. And sometimes when you're trying to figure things out in van life, you got to find things that are going to be multi-use. This is not the best office chair, I will say. It does sit at the right height, so it makes it very comfortable for me to sit here at the laptop. But the reason why I like this is because it is a water container, basically. So this gives me the option of storing 6 gallons of extra water. But I also use it as just a little stool to sit. It sits, again, nice height at my kitchen table if I'm just preparing food. But another big benefit for me with this cooler is being able to use it outside to help me put my awning away, because my awning's pretty high on the van. So this gives me a stool to be able to stand on to put the awning away, and that's super convenient. It does get a little bit uncomfortable because it is just a hard, flat surface, but in those times I just grab a pillow and sit on the pillow, and that's pretty nice. It doesn't have any way for me to kind of like lean back or slouch. I mean, I can lean against my cabinet here, but for the most part, it kind of forces me to have to sit up and have good posture, which again is going to help me throughout the day and not get fatigued at the laptop. So really take some time, think about your workspace. It's going to be where you're going to be spending. Unfortunately, we have all these dreams that we're going to be doing all these things, but if you're working and making a living, you're going to spend a lot of time in this location. All right, so the second thing that you're really going to need to put some consideration into is your internet. If you're going to be working remotely, obviously you got to have some way to connect to your home office, or in my case, I'm a YouTuber, so I have to have some way to be able to upload videos and content to different social media platforms. But internet is going to be extremely important for the offsite worker. And there's a few different options that are out there. I mean, you can either use your mobile data, and if you're going to do that, you definitely want to make sure that you have a big enough plan to where you're not getting overage charges for the amount of data that you're using. Or another option, which is what I use, is Starlink. Starlink is got a mobile option. It is pretty expensive, and there's quite a bit of investment in getting set up with the gear, but it does give you a lot more options as far as where you can be. With mobile data, you pretty much got to be somewhere within cell tower range. That kind of keeps you tied to areas where it's fairly populated. And sometimes one of the challenges there is you can even still have good cell phone service, but if there's a lot of people and they're all actively using the cell towers, you can find that even though you have, like, say 3 or 4 bars of service, your internet will be really, really slow. So I find that the Starlink probably works best for me. And the nice thing about the Starlink is, like I said, I'm not tied to towers. I can be pretty much anywhere and get internet. Now, there are downsides, because if you're in an extremely treed or wooded area where you have a lot of tree coverage, the Starlink just isn't going to work well. It has to have clear sight of the sky to be able to give you good internet. So you do want to keep that in consideration as well. But like I said, I find that with the Starlink, it does actually work almost better the more remote that I get, because if I am in an area where there's a lot of Starlink users, it can be similar to the data in the fact that it will get congested and you'll find that your speeds are really slow, and that can be really problematic if you're trying to get some work done. If you're constantly getting disconnected from the internet. So for me, the Starlink works extremely well in this situation, because a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is creating content in remote locations. And like I said, almost the more remote I get, the better the Starlink works for me. Another thing that I have done with my Starlink is I've modified it and flat mounted it. And this is a system through Star Mount Systems. It's not through Starlink, and it does require you to do some pretty heavy modifications to your Starlink. But it's really nice for me because it allows the Starlink just to sit flat on my rack all the time, and I don't have to get it out and set anything up. Now, there's some downsides to that as well. With my Starlink constantly mounted to my van, it means the van always has to be itself in an open space. And if it's an extremely hot day, that can be problematic, because obviously the van gets very warm if it's in the direct sun. But it is nice because it's just a convenience factor. Pretty much anywhere I can just hit the inverter and it fires up, and I have internet. I don't have to store the Starlink anywhere, then get it out, plug it all in, set it up, put it on stand. But the benefit to that is Starlink gives you a pretty long cord. So if it is a hot day, you could park your vehicle maybe in some shade and still be able to string and mount the Starlink stand out somewhere where it's got the open sky, but your van can stay somewhere a little bit cooler. So just some things to consider. Like I said, I really like the flat mount. I just like the convenience of it. Like I said, it's not perfect all the time. And again, think about with the Star Mount or the Starlink, like the locations you plan to be working from, make sure you're going to have clear access to the sky, because you will need that. But I do think for most cases, it's a better option than just trying to use cell phone data. All right, so let's talk about the third thing, which is going to be your power and how you're going to power all these devices. Now, you shouldn't use your start battery for this. The start batteries are just not designed for it. It'll ruin the start battery very quickly. You really want to think about some type of secondary battery system. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can go about this. You can look at one of the many portable systems out there, like say one from my sponsor today, which is Jackery, which we'll talk about in a minute. or you can build a more elaborate, like built-in house power system where you put in your own lithium battery, put in your own chargers and solar and alternator power and offshore power. And I have actually a combination of both. So I'll basically kind of run down quickly how I'm set up. So I do have two 100 amp hour lithium batteries, which I would say if you're going to live in your van and work out of your van, that's probably the minimum amount of amp hours you're really going to want, because if you're working 8 hours a day and you're running other devices like refrigerator, fans, heaters, things like that, you're going 200 amp hours is going to get eaten up pretty quickly. So I like I said, I think 200 amp hours gives you enough to do all that, and also gives you just enough float to make sure that you can get to the next charge cycle, which is what we'll get into now. It's how I actually charge those batteries. Now I have a RedArc Manager 30, and that handles charging from 3 different ways. I can charge either via my alternator, from the grid if I'm somewhere where I can just plug into straight AC, and I can also charge via solar that way. I also have an extra DC to DC from RedArc that allows, when I'm charging off my alternator, allows me to charge up to 55 amps. So basically the Manager 30 gives me 30 amps, and then I got a 25 amp DC to DC gives me a total of 55 amps when the van is running at idle. Now, one thing you got to consider if you're doing that is you're going to have to upgrade your alternator. The stock alternator that's going to come in most vehicles isn't going to have enough power to not only run the vehicle, but supply that extra amount of amperage to the DC to DC to be able to supply that to your battery. So you're going to have to upgrade your alternator, which I did do. I think I have a 170 amp alternator that at idle that it will run up to 170 amps. So keep that in mind as well if this is a route that you're going to go. But like I said, I can also charge via shore power, which is just grid power. You know, if I'm somewhere at somebody's house, I can just plug into their, with an extension cord and charge my batteries that way. So that might be something you might want to consider if you're going to be living out of your van, but maybe you're going to be somewhere where that's an option, then you can do that. But the other thing is too, is I got 300 watts of solar on the van, which isn't a ton, but it does, when I got full sun, I can get up to 15 amps of charging that way into my batteries. Now here just recently, I've added another device. I've added a small generator. It's just a little portable generator that I can, get out and start up. And with it running on its eco mode, I can get the full 30 amps of charging going from my shore power plug. So that gives me options on days like the last couple of days where we just haven't had any sun, and I've been sitting here for about 3 days editing and trying to get a few other things wrapped up before I take off on my next adventure. It's allowed me to keep the van charged up so I could just work every day. So that's another good option. Now I do, like I said, have a Jackery system in the van as well, and that's a Jackery 1000, and I use it as my central hub because it already has all the ports I need for doing all the work that I'm doing. So I've got AC ports for the laptop, I've got USB ports for my tablet and charging my other devices, and it kind of has everything centrally located here where my desk is. So that is also something you might want to think back in section 1 where we talked about workspace is, make sure that you have all the ports you need to be able to plug everything in at your workspace. But it adds that kind of convenience. But the other nice thing is if there's something happened to my house power system and it went down, I have a backup battery solution, not only for me to get my work done, but it's important for me to have backup battery for my refrigerator so I don't lose my food until I can figure out what's going on with my house system and get it back up and running. Another thing I like about having a portable system is just the option to be able to go outside with it and work outside. And, maybe it's a warm day and you just want to go sit under a shade tree for a few hours and work. You have that option with a portable system. Again, I've got a lot of different options to make sure I can stay powered up in my van. You don't need to have all of these, to make it work. But again, the more options you have, the less problems you'll face down the road. Hey folks, I'm going to jump in here real quick and talk about today's sponsor, which is Jackery. Jackery Prime Big Deal Day sale is on now. Discounts up to 40% off from now until October 11th, 2023. That's a huge discount, and you will find the best deals on October 10th and 11th. Be sure to follow Jackery on Facebook and YouTube for the mega live event on October 10th. There will be giveaways totaling up to $50,000. For more information on the Jackery sales and giveaways, be sure to check out my description below. All right, the fourth thing that we're going to talk about today is something that you probably have already put some thought into if you're thinking about living in your van, and that's going to be climate control. If you're going to be spending a lot of time working at your computer, you're going to want to be comfortable, and that means staying warm in the winter and staying cool in the summer. And there's a lot of different ways that you can go about that. And we're not going to dive into all the different, there's all kinds of different heating systems for vans. There's all kinds of different ways to cool your van. Another option is climate chasing. And that means like you can go somewhere in the wintertime that stays relatively warm, or in the summertime when it's hot, you try to chase a climate that's cooler. That's another option if you don't want to invest in some kind of heating cooling system for your vehicle. Now I do have a heating system and somewhat of a cooling system. My heating system is a Propex heater. It runs on propane, and then I installed a undermount propane tank in my van, so that way I've got 7 gallons of propane to run the heater throughout the winter, and that helps keep me pretty warm and comfortable. And the nice thing is about the Propex over, say, the cheaper diesel heaters, is it has a nice thermostat, so it just kind of comes on and off as I need, so I don't have to kind of mess with it. Whereas most of the cheaper diesel heaters, they are either on or off, and they don't have a true thermostat to basically shut themselves off if the van gets up to a certain temperature that you want to be at, or a way to turn themselves off if the van drops below that temperature. So I do like that. I do think that the diesel heaters can be a little bit warmer than the Propex, so that's something to consider, but I do like the convenience of the Propex. As far as cooling in my van, only thing I have is a MaxxAir fan. I usually turn that on exhaust, and then I'll crack the rear windows in the back, and that creates a nice cross breeze. And if it's a really hot day, I'll just open up the doors all together, and then that way I can get a lot of air through. But then I'll turn up the fan a little bit more and really like suck that air and create like a wind tunnel through the van, and that really helps keep things cooler. Now, one option I do have that probably a lot of you guys may not have is I do rent a small 2-bay shop where I do a lot of work on my van. Anything that needs to be maintenanced or fixed, I do work there. But I also built in one corner of the shop a small office space that has an air conditioner in it. So sometimes in the summer here, we can get a couple weeks where it just gets ridiculously hot. And in those days, a lot of times I'll just retreat to my office there. And if I have to do any sustained work, I'll do it inside that office with the air conditioner. Now, I know that they do have some air conditioners, 12-volt air conditioners now for vans, and they've obviously had air conditioners for RVs for a long time. It's just, unfortunately, a lot of those require a lot of power, and if you are going to look down that road, you're really going to have to, again, put a lot of thought into your power system. All right, so this brings us to number 5, and I think this is really probably the most important, and I made it last just to keep you guys on the video, but it probably should have been the first thing that you think about before you even consider this, and it should be, what type of job do you have? What kind of remote job? Now, obviously, if you're thinking about this, you do have some kind of job that allows you to work remotely, and you don't typically have to show up to a brick and mortar location. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have ultimate freedom. If you have an 8 to 5 job where you have to sign in every morning by a certain time and stay signed in, and have some kind of proof that you're working throughout the day until say like 5 o'clock, then one of the challenges you might find living out of a van is just finding locations where you're going to have everything that you need. Like if you're using Starlink like I do, you're going to have to find a location where you can sit and not be bothered for 5 days and have good internet access. And that can sometimes be a challenge. Now, for folks that work what I consider more of a quota system, where basically you don't have any set hours, you just have a certain amount of work that has to be accomplished, and you can do that work at any time. I think those kind of jobs lean a little bit better to van life than, say, if you have an 8 to 5 job where you have to physically be signed in, because that gives you a little bit more freedom to kind of move around. And if you get interrupted or something happens where you have to move, it's not going to be a big deal. So, and if you're got a lot of plans where you think that living in a van, you're going to do a lot of traveling, I think you're going to find that if you have an 8 to 5 job where you're kind of locked in for 5 days, for 8 hours a day behind the computer, that you're going to find travel periods kind of hard to work out. And then when you do travel, you're always going to be kind of thinking about, like, am I going to find somewhere where I can work the next week? So you're always going to be kind of thinking about kind of have that on your mind, and you might be spending a lot of your free time where you kind of hope to be doing some more fun things, hunting for a place for you to be able to lock in for the next week to work. So it's not impossible for these things to do these things, but just something to think about if you are considering this lifestyle and you have that type of job. Again, I think the kind of the job where you can kind of manage your own hours leans definitely much better to this lifestyle than a job where you're kind of locked into hours. So again, like I said, anything's possible, and if you're willing to make it work out, and you can figure ways around it. But just want you to kind of think about that, and make sure that right out of the gate, that before you start investing in all this other stuff that we just talked about, that you are sure that this is the right decision for you. Anyways, folks, I hope you found this a little bit useful. If you did, please do give it a like if you'd like to see more videos like this about living around van life, or if you want to see videos about camping tips and some stuff like that, please leave a comment down below, leave the video a like, and we'll catch you guys again outside.